Hello, everyone. My name is Zuhir Chaudhry, and today we will explain terms such as sporadic, endemic, epidemic, and pandemic. These terms are used to describe levels of disease occurrence for a given population, and these levels also dictate an epidemiological investigation, whether it should be conducted, and how to analyze disease spread. So we'll introduce these terms like epidemic, pandemic, endemic, and explain um, uh, these terms with specific examples from around the world. So a sporadic disease occurs infrequently and irregularly amongst a population. The cases are few and separated widely in time and place, that they show no or little connection with each other, nor a recognizable common source of infection. However, a sporadic disease could be the starting point of an epidemic when conditions are favorable for its spread, so we need to be careful. Here is an example of sporadic disease. So the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, which is MERS-CoV, is a viral respiratory disease that sporadically has been occurring between 2012 till present, and it occurs infrequently in the Arabian Peninsula and is often associated with travel or close contact with camels. The case fatality, however, is very, very high, 9.5% to 34.4%. And this is what Saudi Arabia has been reporting up until 2022 March 31. So like almost a year worth of data. So 6 cases were reported. They happened in different places in Saudi Arabia, so a little bit sporadic. And you can see the region, the age of the patient, and the exposure, whether they were exposed to camel, and whether they consumed camel milk, or whether they had contact with any other MERS-CoV patients. And then finally, date of laboratory confirmation and the status, whether they survived or died. The next term that I'll explain is endemic. So what does endemic mean? Endemic is derived from Greek en, meaning in or within, and demos, meaning people. A disease outbreak is endemic when it is consistently present but limited to a particular region. This makes the disease spread and rates very predictable. Endemic disease is the amount of a particular disease that is usually present in a community and is referred to as the baseline level of the disease. In the absence of intervention and assuming that the level is not high enough to deplete the pool of susceptible persons, the disease may continue to occur at this level indefinitely. Thus, the baseline level is often regarded as the expected level of the disease. Here is an example of endemic malaria in the tropics. This map shows an approximation of the parts of the world where malaria transmission occurs. Malaria, for example, is considered endemic in certain countries and regions. Temperature is particularly critical. For example, at temperature below 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit, Plasmodium falciparum, which causes severe malaria, cannot complete its growth cycle in the Anopheles mosquito and thus cannot be transmitted. Generally, in warmer region close to the equator, transmission will be more intense and malaria is transmitted year-round and is therefore endemic. And you can see those endemic region right here, the equator, a few degrees from the tropics. In other parts where the temperature is more temperate, such as Western Europe and the United States, due to economic development and public health measure, they've been able to successfully eliminate malaria, and malaria is not endemic in those parts of the globe. Um, Outbreak or and an epidemic, these are two terms with a slight different meaning. So occasionally, the amount of disease in a community rise above the expected level. So this is the unexpected level. This occurrence of unexpected cases of a disease for a particular time and place is called an outbreak. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, describes an epidemic as an unexpected increase in the number of disease cases in a specific geographic area. Thus, epidemic refers to an increase, often sudden, in the number of cases of a disease above what is normally expected in the population in that area. Outbreak, outbreak carries the same definition of epidemic, but is often used for a more limited geographic area. An outbreak is greater than anticipated increase in the number of endemic cases. An epidemic is typically more prolonged and widespread than an outbreak. Example, yellow fever, smallpox and measles and polio are prime examples of epidemic. An epidemic disease doesn't necessarily have to be contagious. West Nile fever and the rapid increase in obesity rates are also considered epidemics. Epidemics can refer to disease or other specific health-related behaviors such as smoking, with rates that are clearly above the expected occurrence in a community or region. There is no generally accepted number or percentage increase of cases that may describe an epidemic. It is what public health officials consider, usually based on previous surveillance, to be greater than expected for a specific disease or symptoms for that area. The increase can be relatively small. For example, a few sporadic cases of smallpox anywhere in the world would likely be characterized as an epidemic, since even a single case is more than what would be expected for that region. Example in here is shown the West Nile virus epidemic in the United States. The 2002 West Nile virus epidemic in the United States was the largest arboviral meningoencephalitis epidemic documented in the Western Hemisphere, and the largest reported West Nile WNME epidemic. Epidemic activity was most intense in central part of the United States, especially the Great Lake region, and extended to the West Coast. Human surveillance of West Nile virus in 2002 showed a total of 3,389 human cases of West Nile virus disease as being reported, compared to only 149 during the period of 1999 to 2001. Also, animal and mosquito surveillance detected a very large number of West Nile virus infected birds, equines, and mosquitoes during this in 2002. So the difference between epidemic and endemic, you can see it here in the chart. You can see that here the levels of the specific illness or cases of this illness, of the specific illness, are endemic in this region. And here you can see the outbreak detection level. So when the cases increase beyond this detection level, it would be considered an outbreak or epidemic. And if it's below that, it would be an undetected outbreak, even though the levels are higher, because that's the detection level. Here you can see an epidemic one in 1999, and epidemic two later on in here, of a disease with specific cases as shown in here, whereas in here it's a different disease during the same time period that is, even though the cases number are higher, it's still following the expected seasonal or curves, so it is not considered an epidemic. Whereas in here, lower cases, but since it's higher than the detection level, it's considered an epidemic. For example, as shown in this figure, the seasonal epidemic threshold here, it's in blue curve, and this is set by CDC based on data from previous 5 years, when actual mortality rates in this case, shown in the y-axis, exceed this epidemic threshold, the disease is considered to be epidemic. As this graph shows, pneumonia and influenza-related mortality saw pronounced epidemic during the winters of 2003, right here, and early 2004, then again in 2005, and then finally in 2008. So in each of these cases, there would be epidemics. So what is a pandemic? Pandemic is defined as a global epidemic that spreads in several countries or continents, usually affecting a large number of people. It is important to note that WHO is the authority and official organization that can declare a true pandemic. The World Health Organization, or WHO, declares a pandemic when a disease growth is exponential. This means the growth rate is skyrocketing, and each day cases grow more than the day prior. In being declared a pandemic, the virus has nothing to do with virology, population immunity, or disease severity. It means a virus covers a wide area affecting several countries and population. In this table, you can see the difference between epidemic and pandemic. So the WHO defines pandemic, epidemic, and endemic diseases based on a disease rate of spread. Thus, the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic isn't in the severity of the disease as mentioned earlier, but the degree to which it is spread. A pandemic cuts across international boundaries as opposed to regional epidemics. This wide geographical reach is what makes pandemics lead to large-scale social disruption, economic loss, and general hardship. It's important to note that a once declared epidemic can progress into pandemic status. While an epidemic is large, it is also generally contained or expected in its spread, while a pandemic is international and out of control. In this map, you can see the differences more visually among this terminology based on geographic distribution of the illness. In A, you can see endemic disease. In B, sporadic, epidemic in here, endemic region, but epidemic in here, and then pandemic as it is spread all over in multiple continents. A common example we experienced recently is the COVID-19 worldwide pandemic, the high contagiousness of the virus. This figure illustrates the geographic distribution of COVID-19 cases in China, here to the left. The dark gray area indicates the region with zero COVID-19 cases as of 23 January 2020. The red path show routes from Wuhan to other cities or regions. In this stage, it was an epidemic. Once it started spreading from China to other parts of the globe, it became slowly a pandemic as it started spreading in multiple countries and multiple continents. As shown in here, COVID-19 spreading into multiple continents, eventually it led to the designation as a pandemic. In this figure, we can see COVID-19 cases, new cases in the world since it became endemic worldwide. In the beginning, you can see the epidemic peak in here during January 2020 in China, followed by the pandemic peak sometimes in between, and then finally after July 2023, as it becomes endemic in here. The cases actually are not reported anymore either because it's just endemic. I hope that this was useful in reviewing key epidemiologic terminologies that describe the level of disease occurrence.